Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dark Domain. Now I know a lot of you these videos to sleep. So before you drift off, I thought it would be a fun idea. If everyone could leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episode. Right, let's get comfy and relaxed and let's. Nathan Carter had spent years as a late-night DJ, accustomed to the eerie stillness of the empty radio station. The hum of the equipment, the soft crackle of static between songs, these were the familiar sounds of his solitude. It was a routine he had grown to love, a quiet world where only his voice filled the silence of the sleeping city. But that night, something else was listening. As he sifted through records, searching for the next track, an unsettling sound crackled through his headphones. At first, it was faint, almost indistinguishable from the static. Then, beneath the white noise, a whisper emerged, thin, distant, but undeniably real. His hands hesitated over the turntable. The voice was soft yet sharp, like breath against cold glass. The words sent a chill down his spine. He spun around, expecting to see someone standing behind him, but the studio was empty. The only thing staring back at him was the blinking red light of the live broadcast feed. His fingers trembled as he adjusted the frequency, convinced it was just interference. Old buildings like this often picked up stray signals, fragments of police radios, overlapping frequencies from other stations. Yet, deep down, something felt wrong. The voice had spoken his name. A cold unease slithered down his spine as he convinced himself it was nothing more than a technical glitch. But the whisper returned, louder, clearer. It weaved through the static, curling around his ears like unseen fingers. It didn't just say his name this time, it spoke of things buried in the dark corners of his mind. Forgotten childhood fears, old regrets that still haunted him. Secrets he had never spoken aloud. His throat went dry, a thick weight settling in his chest. Nathan reached for the switch, killing the feed in an instant. The speakers hissed as the station plunged into silence, but the whisper did not stop. It lingered, curling around him like an unseen breath, slipping beneath the silence as if it had never needed the radio to be heard in the first place. Nathan returned to the radio station the following night, his thoughts tangled between curiosity and fear. The previous night's experience had left him rattled, but he needed answers. Maybe it had been a trick of his mind, exhaustion, auditory illusions, or interference from another frequency. But as he stepped into the dimly lit booth, the unease in his chest only grew heavier. The air felt charged, thick with something unseen. He hesitated before settling into his chair, adjusting the controls with shaky fingers. Then, the whispers returned. This time, they weren't alone. The voices layered over each other, a chorus of murmuring swirling through the static, filling the empty room with an unnatural presence. At first, he struggled to make sense of them, but then, one voice broke through, clear, sharp, dripping with cold certainty. "You will not make it home tonight." Nathan's pulse pounded in his ears. His mind raced. Was this a message? A warning? He snatched his phone and quickly texted his producer, Daniel, who had just left the building minutes ago. His fingers trembled as he hit send. The silence that followed felt suffocating, stretching impossibly long. Then, his phone vibrated. He expected a reply from Daniel, but instead, it was a news alert. His breath caught in his throat. A fatal car accident had just been reported only a few blocks away from the station. The victim, Daniel. His hands went cold as he read the name. His heartbeat drummed against his ribs, a nauseating wave of dread washing over him. This wasn't a prank. It wasn't a stray signal. The voices knew. They had told him. He clutched his phone, unable to process the impossible. But then, through the speakers, the whispers shifted. The static pulsed, almost like breathing. And then, through the crackling hum, they laughed. A chorus of eerie, breathless chuckles filled the room. "We warned you, Nathan." The station lights flickered violently, casting long and natural shadows across the walls. Nathan shot up from his chair, panic surging through his veins. His shaking hands darted across the controls, turning every knob, flipping every switch in a desperate attempt to kill the transmission. But the whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder. The static wasn't just noise anymore, it was alive, vibrating with unseen forces. The air around him felt thick, suffocating. As the lights pulsed, the soundboard seemed to move on its own, dials twisting, signals shifting. He wasn't in control anymore. Something else was. Nathan couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, the whispers echoed in his mind, their eerie cadence seeping into his thoughts. He kept replaying Daniel's accident, the way the voices had warned him, the way they had laughed. Rationality told him to quit, to leave the station behind and never return, but something stronger kept pulling him back. It wasn't just curiosity. It was a sickening certainty that the voices wanted him there, waiting for him to listen. So, against his better judgment, he returned to the booth, slipping on his headphones with reluctant dread. The whispers were waiting for him. The static crackled, and the overlapping voices slithered into his ears. At first, it was the same cryptic murmuring, but then one voice surfaced through the noise, colder than the rest. The woman in the red coat, under the bridge. Lifeless, a deep chill ran through Nathan's spine. His throat tightened as panic clawed at his chest. Were they warning him again? Did they want him to stop it? His fingers fumbled over his phone as he dialed the police. He hesitated. How could he explain this? His voice shook as he gave an anonymous tip, muttering something about a suspicious figure near the old railway bridge. Then, he waited, stomach twisting in knots. Hours later, his screen lit up with a breaking news alert. Nathan's breath caught as he read the words. A woman in a red coat found drowned beneath the bridge. His stomach churned, his hands felt numb. It had happened again. The whispers had known. The whispers were never wrong. The weight of it pressed down on his chest. Was this his responsibility? Had he done enough, or was he simply another piece in whatever sick game they were playing? He tore his headphones off, heart pounding against his ribs, bile rising in his throat. He needed to get out. Now, he spun toward the door and reached for the handle, but when he twisted it, the knob wouldn't turn. He yanked harder. Nothing. His breath itched. He pushed against the door, but it didn't budge. It wasn't just locked. It was sealed. Panic surged through him as he pounded against the wood, his fists aching. The air in the room turned ice cold. His breath curled into mist before his face. The soundboard lights flickered erratically, casting distorted shadows against the walls. And then, the static surged, growing louder, twisting into something far worse than before. The whispers layered over each other in a cacophony of voices, melting into one chilling phrase. "You're ours now, Nathan." Days blurred together, each one dissolving into the next like a fevered hallucination. Nathan no longer knew if he was awake or drowning in a nightmare. The whispers never ceased. They filled the silence, weaving horrors that had yet to unfold, each prediction a thread tightening around his throat. Sleep was a distant memory, food an afterthought. The station walls felt closer than before, suffocating, as though the very air had thickened with unseen malice. He stopped resisting. He stopped fighting. He listened. He obeyed. The static became his only companion, its shifting cadence a cruel lullaby that kept him tethered to the booth. Then, one night, the whispers changed. Their tone was different, more insistent, almost excited. A chorus of voices murmured in unison, weaving together in a chilling harmony. "It's time for your story, Nathan." A slow, icy dread crept up his spine. He turned to the radio screen, breath catching in his throat. The digital display flickered erratically, glitching between static and something far worse. His name appeared, bold and unchanging. Then, beneath it, the words scrolled in a methodical, unfeeling rhythm. Nathan Carter, found dead in his studio. An apparent victim of an unexplained accident. Authorities report strange interference on the radio waves. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. His lungs burned with each shallow breath. No, this isn't real. His hands shook as he clawed at the controls, desperately trying to cut the signal, to shut it off, to silence the prophecy before it became reality. But the scream refused to change. The transmission continued, as if reality itself had already accepted his fate. The whispers hummed around him, no longer distant. They were closer now, pressing against his skin, curling into his breath. He staggered back, his vision blurring, his legs weak beneath him. The temperature plummeted once more, frost creeping along the edges of the console. A cold, unseen presence curled around his throat, tightening, suffocating. The realization struck him like a blade to the gut. The voices had never been warning him. They had been guiding him here all along. The station wasn't letting him go. It never intended to. The morning sun broke over the city, casting its pale light into the radio booth, now abandoned and eerily still. The station's owner arrived, expecting the usual morning rush, but what he found instead was something far more unsettling. Nathan's chair, the one he'd always sat in during his late-night shifts, spun slowly on its own, as if the DJ had only just left. But Nathan was gone. There were no signs of a struggle, no trace of where he had gone, or why. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. The equipment crackled to life on its own. The static hissed through the speakers, rising and falling like the breath of some unseen, living entity. And then, in the thick silence, a whisper slithered across the airwaves, barely audible, yet unmistakably clear. Nathan is still here. Across town, listeners had heard it too. That night, as the clock struck midnight, Nathan's voice filtered through the static, distorted and broken, yet familiar. It repeated one chilling phrase, echoing from the speakers like a final warning. I see you. No wonder how or why this happened. The station scrambled for an explanation, but no one was able to trace the source. It was as though Nathan had never truly left the airwaves. No one wanted to work the night shift at the station again. The whispers in the static had become too much for anyone to bear. The ghostly voice of Nathan haunted the equipment, lingering like a dark presence. Over time, the station abandoned the late-night hours entirely, refusing to air anything after midnight. But if you were brave enough or foolish enough to tune in, just right, on a quiet road, you might hear the static hum. You might hear Nathan's voice, still trapped within the frequency, still reaching out, still waiting. And if you listened too long, the whispers might just call your name next.